Training camp has started and the Blue Jackets are going to be on the ice later today, but there's some big questions to answer. And how is their injury news already? We'll break all that down on today's Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get things started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. I also have to let you know today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Training camp got underway yesterday. Nothing too exciting, photos, medicals, etc. But they did release, I think, sometime on Tuesday, they released the full roster. So we're going to go through that. Kind of who's here, who's not here. No one is not here that is not expected to be here, right? That is expected to be here, I should say. We're going to go through the injury news that came up at the media day availability that I didn't talk about in yesterday's episode. And then I've got a bunch of questions about training camp. And again, none of them are like the double jeopardy final question for $1 million type question, but they are still questions that need answering, right? So let's go through them. But I want to start by just running through the training camp roster. Now, it's not a huge roster. Don Waddell doesn't like big training camp rosters, so they are typically a little bit smaller than they've been in the past few years. I feel like last season was pretty small as well, although I think honestly bigger than this season's, because I believe last season, and I might be wrong about this, but I believe last season was the year that everyone at the prospect tournament did so well that they all got an invite to training camp. This is not the case this time. So just in terms of guys that you expect Bujeta to be there, you expect Marchenko to be there, etc., right? So I'm just going to go through guys that you maybe wouldn't expect to be there, right? So Brandon Gaunt is going to be there, Hudson Fasching, Jordan Dumais, Jack Williams, Hunter McCown, Luca Pinelli, Riley Bizot, Ryland Mosley, who I thought had a very good prospect tournament, Luca Del Barbaluz, James Malatesta, Mikhail Pucher, Oliver Keskinen, Roman Ashan, Nicholas Seamer, Max McHugh, Owen Griffin for the forwards. And then on defense, you've got Brendan Smith, who's there on a PTO, remember? And then you've got Damon Hunt, Dyson Mayo, Christian Yaros, Marcus Kearsey, another camp invite, or a prospect tournament invite, that I believe got invited to training camp on the back of his tournament. Will McKinnon, Charlie Alec, Ola Julian Bjorkvik-Holm, Corson Kuhlman, Stanislav Sozil, Guillaume Brichard, Caleb McDonald, and then goaltenders, no surprises here. You got Ivan Fedotov, Nolan Lalonde, Evan Gardner, Zach Sochenko, and then obviously, you got the big two, Jet and Elvis. I didn't go through the roster. So, like I said, the Werenskis, the Gabransons, the Fantillis, the Mathieu Oliviers, like you fill in the gaps, right? But those are all of the guys that are not locks to make the opening night roster that are also at camp. So, like I said, there's a couple of fun names there. Nicholas Seamer and Marcus Kearsey are the two camp invites. Or the free agent, the tournament invites that did well at the prospect tournament that have then managed to snag a spot at training camp. Again, I don't expect them to stick around for very long. My guess is that this is a just kind of hey, you did good in that tournament. Come hang out with the big boys for a bit, and then we'll talk later on in the season. I believe both of them are going back to the CHL. Simo going back to Saginaw, and I believe Kearsey is a QMJHL guy, playing for Charlottetown. So those guys are both going to be back in the CHL next season, but it never hurts to get some time at regular training camp, right? Everyone else on the list is either a drafted prospect, Keskinen, Owen Griffin, etc., or guys that are going to be on the AHL squad. So like Roman Ashan, for example, people like that. Riley Bizot is there. He comes to the Blue Jackets from the Panthers organization, I want to say. Played in Charlotte last season, and also Savannah of the ECHL. So again, a guy that is probably going to be in the first round of cuts, but an interesting addition, especially considering Don Waddell likes those smaller groups, right? And I do wonder if some of the injuries to guys have kind of necessitated just having an extra body on hand for, whatever reason. Again, none of the injuries, we'll go through them in a second. There's no serious injuries, and there's no that's incorrect, actually. There is a serious injury, but it's no serious injuries to Blue Jackets, right? No serious injuries to the guys that you're going to expect in the top 12 forwards, the top 6 defensemen, and the top 2 goalies, knock on wood, because this team is cursed, and I can only use my powers for evil, right? But it's not a particularly exciting training camp roster. There's no one that I'm like, oh wow, he's going to be here. Obviously, there are going to be guys missing that, like there's no Jackson Smith, there's no Caden Lindstrom because their college seasons have started already, right? Same reasons that they weren't in the prospect tournament. So I would expect to see them next season if they turn pro. But for the most part, there's, again, everyone that I expected to be here is here. You've got Charlie Ellick here, you've got Emmett Gardner here, Owen Griffin, the more recent draft picks, Luca Morelli is listed, despite the fact that he will not be taking part in training camp. I assume he's in Columbus. I don't know what the plan is, whether the plan is to do with him what they did with Caden Lindstrom last season and just kind of keep him in Columbus to do rehab, keep an eye on him, and also like integrate him into the team so he's not just like sad and lonely and injured all the time. Because I do think that was a really great thing that the Blue Jackets did last season for Lindstrom, right? Is that he was injured basically all season and was in Columbus basically the entire season as well, right? There's a lot of really good, I think most of it existed on like Instagram stories and stuff, but there's like a really good picture of him at, I think it was Eric Gabransson's kid's birthday party. And it was him and Gabranson and Boone Jenner and the injured Blue Jackets all went to Gabransson's kid's like 4th birthday party, and stuff like that. I think Lindstrom, like that was a really important off-ice thing to do, right? And I do wonder if they'll do the same thing for Morelli. So actually, let's get into the injuries, because like I said, Morelli is the serious one. He had surgery on a torn labrum. And so he's out not only for camp, but until at least December. And I think Don Waddell said that he's out until January, actually. So like that's half the season gone for Morelli, which is really, really tough. Both for him and for the Monsters. So I think we're counting on having Morelli in the mix. So like that sucks, but hopefully, the Blue Jackets are nothing if not experienced with torn labrums, right? So I'm sure that they'll know what's best for him to get him back and healthy and fighting fit and whatnot in good time. Denton Mateychuk is day-to-day with a groin injury, apparently. Again, they don't think that's anything to worry about. He's going to be off the ice this week, and then they're hoping that by the weekend he's going to be good to go. So my guess is you won't see him in the first handful of preseason games. And I'll talk through the preseason schedule in a second here, because it's truly unhinged as a preseason schedule. So he's not going to be on the ice. John DeMay and Max McHugh are also day-to-day. They picked up some injuries at the prospect tournament, which does make sense as to why Max McHugh... I noticed that Max McHugh did not play in the third game. He was scratched, and I did wonder why that was. Now it makes sense. I guess he got injured in the second game. Jordan DeMay, they sent him out for warm-ups, didn't feel right for the third game against the Penguins, and they played with, I think, 11 forwards for the entire game, which is not ideal, but... it's kind of the last thing that he needs, right? I talked about this a little bit yesterday, is his young career has already been so, like he missed a lot of last season. He missed a ton, like, the season before. He's played, I think, 45 games total over the last 2 seasons. So the last thing he needs is for this injury to linger into training camp, into preseason, into the start of the AHL season with the Monsters as well, because like he needs to have a big season with the Monsters. He really, like, not a bounce back season necessarily, and he was fine last season, but I do think that he needs to come out hot this season, right? Because we're kind of getting to that point of, okay, he's 21, he's 22, should be starting to what's the word I want? Should be starting to have an impact on AHL games, right? As a third round draft pick. So McHugh, I assume, is mostly just kind of banged up because he throws himself around like the Tasmanian devil out there. So my guess is that he's just kind of sore and will probably be fine. Again, we'll see these guys hopefully later on in training camp and in preseason. And then the last injury on my list is Owen Sillinger, who I believe is at the end of the recovery. So he had a season-ending knee surgery in, I want to say, like February, March-ish. He's no contact to start camp. He's going to be skating. He's going to be on the ice, but he's not going to be taking any contact. They think he's about a month away from being able to play, which is good news. My guess is, again, it's just kind of with the recovery and the rehab from the knee surgery, probably going deep into the summer. They want to make sure that the knee is 100% in terms of skating before they throw him out into contact drills and game situations and stuff like that. So it's the timeline, right? Again, I don't remember exactly when he had the knee surgery, but this to me is just kind of the end of rehab, not necessarily a setback or a fresh injury for Owen Sillinger. I did see a very funny Instagram post that was like, "Oh my god, key injuries to all these teams," and it said that Cole Sillinger was out for 3 to 6 weeks, and then I looked and it was like, "No, you just saw Sillinger and got mixed up. There are 2 of them. It's Owen." Is the one that's injured. Cole Sillinger, knock on wood, is fine. So those are the injuries. Like I said, there's no big injuries. Like Denton Matejchuk, the one is like probably the one that concerns me the most, if concern is the right word. But at the end of the day, he's day to day. If he's playing, preseason games next week instead of this week, or at the end of the week, then that's fine, right? In terms of the preseason, like again, the preseason schedule is so weird. That it starts on Sunday. They have a game on Sunday. They have a game on Monday. They have a game on Tuesday. They have a game on Wednesday, and then they don't have another game until Saturday, and then they don't have another game until Tuesday, and then they don't have another game until Saturday again. So in the next 2 weeks, they play 4 games in 4 nights, and then 2 nights off, game, 2 days off, game, 3 days off, game. Why is it like this? And I know that the preseason, I believe, is teams mostly organize their own. As far as I'm aware, they it's not like a league. Like the league doesn't sit there and schedule the entire preseason. I believe it's mostly just that teams are like, well, we want to do this amount of games. And I guess they reach out and hey, the Blue Jackets, I assume, will have reached out to the Buffalo Sabres and the Pittsburgh Penguins, for example, who are 2 of the opponents that they face in the preseason, are like, hey, let's get a couple of games scheduled. What do you want to do? So just kind of, again, scheduling weirdness, but doing 4 games in 4 nights and then 3 games in the next 2 weeks is so funny to me. So again, I wouldn't be worried or surprised if we don't see Denton Matejchuk in those first 4 games. Or, again, DeMay, Max McHugh, we'll see them towards the end of preseason is the hope. There's no real worry there, as long as Matejchuk doesn't get worse, because that's an injury that they can't really cope with. But we're catastrophizing. We're going to stop doing that. We're going to take a quick break. And then we're going to talk about some of the big questions for this training camp, because they are not brand new questions, but they are, in fact, questions. So we'll go through those in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. First, I'm going to tell you about FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you're going to get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel is great because it doesn't matter how you like to bet, whether you like to, think that you want to do just a player prop. This player is going to score 4 touchdowns. Or if you want to build a same game parlay, which is, you get a bunch of different stats and guess that, this team is going to win and this team is going to win and this team is going to win. And if all 3 teams win, you get money. That works for them as well. You can even jump in live as the action unfolds. Are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. We got some big training camp questions to answer, and none of them are, like I said, there's no brand new questions here necessarily. It's all stuff that's kind of been the topic of conversation over the summer. But I wanted to talk about a couple of them anyway. So the first one I want to talk about is the biggest question for me is, what are you going to do with those 2 top 6 left wing spots, right? Because from the sound of things, with the media availability with Dean Everson on Monday, it sounds like Monahan and Marchenko are going to get stuck together, which great. They should. Don't separate. Like, this is a set. Do not separate. It sounds like Fantilli and Johnson are also going to be a set. So they're going to start with these duos and then presumably mix guys in and out, right? So again, bunch of options for who this could be. I think Voronkov has a good chance to start on that top line. I think Chinikov is going to have a chance to potentially be in the top 6. I think Boone Jenner is probably going to get every chance in the world to be that second line spot with Fantilli and Johnson, which I super don't hate. I thought that line was fine. Probably better than fine. Fine is maybe understating a little bit. I like that line when they were together towards the end of the season. I think an outside chance is someone like Cole Sillinger, who's almost definitely going to be moved to wing with the additions of Charlie Coyle and Isaac Lundestrom, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I think that having more than one center on a line is extremely fine, and I think, again, Sillinger is one of those guys that you could put in the top 6 if to see if you've got any offense, or you can put him in the bottom 6 and, have him play kind of the game that he's been playing most of last season, which was kind of the two-way center that took a lot of tough assignments and did pretty darn okay with them. So he's a real Boone Jenner of a player, right? Like, he has a similar style, not style necessarily, but Boone Jenner's one of those guys that you can put in the top 6 or the bottom 6, right? And his game kind of works either way. Same thing with Cole Sillinger, right? I think his game works probably best in the middle 6. I don't think he's a top 6 guy. I don't think he's a 4th line guy. But the way that the thing is that good teams have three good lines and 1 checking line, right? You don't need to have your entire bottom 6 be a checking line. And I think having a third line of, ostensibly it could be something like Jenner, Coyle, Sillinger as your third line. Yeah, that's a heavy line to play against, but it's also it's not an unskilled line, right? Boone Jenner's got some goals in him. Cole Sillinger has that offensive potential. Charlie Coyle, probably good for, maybe 15 goals this season, we hope. If you're watching on YouTube, then you saw me cross my fingers. If you weren't watching, then I just crossed my fingers about Charlie Coyle scoring 15 goals. But to kind of go back to my original point is, there's an option for Cole Sillinger to play in the top 6. I think he's probably an outside shot of it. And I think a lot of it, again, depends on how Voronkov looks on the ice. Because, we talked about this a lot yesterday. If he's not in shape, he's not going to play. I think a lot of it depends on what they do with Igor Chinikov, who is a top 6 player only, in my opinion. And when I say that, I don't mean that he should be at the top 6, instead of anyone else. What I mean is, his is a game that works in the top 6. He is not a player like Cole Sillinger that can play down the lineup and be successful. And I think that's part of why things went wrong at the end of last season. Like, obviously he wasn't 100% healthy. Like, a blind man could see that. But also, because he wasn't healthy and because he wasn't producing, he got moved down the lineup and shockingly failed to produce for lower down the lineup when he was not playing with skilled line mates and also not being expected to play a skilled game, right? So it's it's one of those like catch-22 things, right? So if you're not playing well, you don't get to play up in the lineup. But sometimes your game's not designed to play low down the lineup. And what happens is you look worse for it. So that's kind of my thoughts on Chinikov is he should be in the top 6 because he's not a player that you play in the bottom 6, right? And so it is kind of he should be in the top 6 or he shouldn't be in the lineup, which is not like an ideal situation, especially when you look at, the contention that he's had with the coach and, he wants to play. And if he doesn't play in Columbus, then he wants to play somewhere else, etc. But like, I think if he can stay healthy, there is a top 6 player there, absolutely. So, that to me is going to be the question of how's that going to shake out. I think he should get a chance to see if he can play with Monahan and Marchenko. That was a really good line before he got injured early in the season last year. Again, Voronkov, definitely an option. Like, if I had to put money on it, my guess would be one of Chinikov or Voronkov on the top spot, and then Jenner on the second line, just because I know Everson has also talked about how he wants to try and make Jenner on that second line work. And then the question becomes, well, do you put Chinikov on the top line or Voronkov on the top line? Because I do think that Voronkov might perform better on the top line, but I think Voronkov will be better on the third line than Chinikov will be. So I wouldn't be opposed to having Chinikov on the top line and Voronkov on the third line if, because I think, again, his game can be adjusted to playing a third line role. Chinikov's all skill, all speed, right? So that's the biggest question for me is who gets those 2 left wing spots, because as we know, the top 4 defense is basically set. The top, the top 2 centers and the top 2 right wings is set. The bottom 6 is going to be a rotation, and the bottom pairing defenseman is going to be a rotation. Goaltending is anyone's guess, right? Doesn't sound like they've picked a starter. Sounds like it's going to be whoever plays better in camp, which we'll see how that goes. My guess is that Jet Greaves looks better in camp, but Elvis gets the start anyway for a myriad of reasons that I won't go into right now. But maybe I'm wrong. I would love to be wrong. And I do think that this organization is very, very high on Jet Greaves. So maybe I'm the idiot here. But other questions. I want to talk a little bit more about the Russians. And I want to talk a little bit about any surprises making the opening night roster, because there are a couple of guys that I think could be in the running to kind of maybe jump some guys in the depth chart. So we'll talk about both of those things in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. First, I want to tell you about Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, investments. When you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why Monarch Money's here. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. And it's built for people with busy lives. If you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. It does all of the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. When I started using Monarch Money, I realized just how many times a week I was buying my $8 lattes and how unsustainable that was. I still got my $8 lattes, but now Monarch reminds me that maybe I've had 3 this week and I shouldn't have another one, which is really helpful. Don't let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for 50% off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNHL. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the Russians, because again, that's a big question for me. And I talked about them in the context of left wing 1, left wing 2, which are the open top 6 spots. But again, it's really, and I talked about this a lot yesterday, so I'm not going to get super into it right now. But one of the questions for me is, does Chinikov show up ready to work? Does Voronkov show up in the Voronkov question to me feels kind of tougher to ask, because I feel like it's really tough to measure long-term conditioning, right? Because by all, he could show up to the ice later today and look incredible, look super in shape. but he's got his legs under him. He's got fresh legs. He's got summer legs, right? And I do wonder, that to me is going to be really hard to quantify because they were like, don't show up out of shape. But if he shows up in shape and then again, like, what happens when he slows down 60 games into the season again? So that is not necessarily a question to answer during training camp because, again, they will have metrics for this. I'm sure they'll put him through, that horrific VO max test with the exercise bike and the big mask that they put athletes through. Like they'll have metrics for conditioning, but you don't know what your legs are going to do until your legs are doing it, right? So that to me feels like it's going to be a long-term question. But one of the beginning of the question certainly is, what does he look like when he gets on the ice later today? And I know that on Monday, Everson talked about, he hasn't seen him on the ice yet. So I'm coming off the ice and he looks great. He does look, and again, with the caveat that I've seen only seen a couple of pictures, and he's wearing shoulder pads and a jersey and a helmet and everything. He does look like he's lost some weight. Like his face looks a little bit thinner. So that to me is probably a good sign that he's shifted a little bit of weight, and typically losing a little bit of weight, especially when you're as big as that, does tend towards your conditioning being a little bit better, just because it's, speaking as someone who has lost a little bit of weight recently, it's so much easier to haul your flesh body around if you are 20 pounds lighter than you were like two months ago, right? So that to me is a good sign. Again, Chinikov, you won't know until you get on the ice, but that again is a question for me of, is he going to get into the top six? Is he going to stick in the top six? And if he doesn't make the cut, if both Voronkov and Jenna leapfrog him, which, there is a decent chance that they might, what happens there? Do they put him on the third line and hope for the best? Do they, does the trade request get a little bit firmer? I don't know. And again, he can't force his way out of town. I mean, he could force his way out of town, but I feel like it would get ugly. And I think Don Waddell has been pretty clear that he's not just going to trade a guy to trade a guy, right? So that's going to be interesting to me to see how the Chinikov situation resolves. I don't necessarily think it is dead in the water. I do think that there is still that question to answer, but again, it's not going to be a question that we answer with that first skate of training camp, which I assume probably happens in about an hour and a half after I upload this episode. Last question for me: who on this training camp roster is kind of a dark horse to make the team? Because I do think that there are options there, right? Like maybe not necessarily on defense. I think the defense is pretty set. They have their top 7 guys. So Christensen, Fabro, Gabranson, Matejchuk, Provorov, Severson, and Werenski. They're their top 7 guys. And like you've brought in Brendan Smith on a PTO, which is intriguing to me, but like I kind of feel like Brendan Smith just fills the same role that Gabranson does, which is just kind of being a good veteran guy that you don't want to play a lot of minutes because he's not like super effective anymore, but still has things to teach the kids, right? And you can make your argument that Smith is a better option for that than Gabranson because he's going to come in cheaper, but I don't see him as a guy that is, supplant any of those top 7. They might carry 8 defensemen. They did it for a lot of last season. They carried a lot of defensemen last season. I think they actually carried 9 defensemen by the end of it because of they had Jack Johnson and Jordan Harris, and then Gabranson came back and got healthy, so they had their 6 guys that they were playing, and then the 3 extra guys. So they carried 9 for, I think, past the trade deadline, which kind of it gets a little bit screwy then anyway. But, there's an outside chance for Brendan Smith, but I'm not I'm not looking at this list. I'm not thinking, Corson Ceulemans is really knocking on the door to be an NHL player, right? They've got some leeway there. I think that, there's options. I think Damon Hunt could play NHL games this year if he needed him to, but I don't think that's going to be, that's not an opening night roster thing. Christian Yaros is another veteran option, played in the KHL last year. My guess is that's a monster. Dyson Mayo is another veteran, played in Henderson last season, the Vegas Golden Knights AHL affiliate. Stanislav Svozil is an intriguing name, but I don't know that he is going to be able to leapfrog any of the 8 or 9 defensemen that I just mentioned there, right? He's probably going to be a really good defenseman in Cleveland this year and should probably, be one of the guys that they call if they need, if he's gonna. If they need a defenseman, he should probably be their first call, right? But I don't know that he's not an opening night lock. So defense is kind of set. Again, goaltending set. It's going to be Jet and Elvis. Fedotov is going to go on waivers, and they're going to call him up if and when they need him, which I assume that they will because of how goaltending works in this organization. But I'm not looking at Fedotov to leapfrog either Elvis or Jet in the depth chart unless one of those guys, really, really stumbles or gets injured for any length of time. So again, goaltending kind of set. In terms of the forwards, though, there are a couple of options here. The main one for me is, to no one's surprise, Luka Delbalbaluz. Knocking on the door, right? Looked extremely good at the NHL level this year. Got kind of lapped by a bunch of veterans coming back and being healthy, which understandable. But he feels like a guy that is right there, right? Again, he's going to be one of the first call-ups. Again, Mikhail Pucha was a guy that was extremely capable in NHL minutes this season. I think Delbalbaluz probably has the edge on Pucha, but like again, looking at if I could just pull up the Blue Jackets depth chart at the minute to make sure I'm not forgetting anybody. They have 14 forwards under on the cap at the minute, but Mikhail Pucha is included in that. I do believe actually he might have to go through waivers to get back down to the Monsters, which might get interesting. But including him, they have 13 forwards, but, I think that it's not a given that Miles Wood is going to play 82 games, right? I do just kind of feel like, and this is this is maybe, a frustration thing, but it seems like the cost of getting Charlie Coyle was not only giving up a good prospect and picks, but also taking Miles Wood's contract. And I don't think Miles Wood is going to fit into Everson's system on account of the fact that he's just kind of fast and ineffective, is what I've heard. And that doesn't seem like a great marriage with Dean Everson's coaching style, right? Like if Damon Severson can get in the bad books, Miles Wood feels like a guy that can get in the bad books pretty easily. So like there is ostensibly there is a hole there, right? And again, like Isaac Lundestrom is a guy that I think is probably going to be fine. Zach Aston Reese is another guy that I think is not nailed into the roster. So there are primarily bottom six and you arguably bottom three guys, bottom line guys. Fourth line is the word I'm looking for there. But there are still opportunities for guys like Pucha, guys like Delbalbaluz to potentially make the roster. If they make it really difficult, like I personally, I would much rather have either of those guys than Miles Wood. If I'm being honest, I would take Delbalbaluz over Zach Aston Reese, quite frankly. And I think that, again, he's going to be a guy that is knocking on the door, right, sooner rather than later. I don't think there's anyone else that I'm looking at as like this is a guy to watch out for. Like Jack Williams might be an option, actually. Again, he's a guy that had a really good prospect tournament. I think the organization's pretty high on him. My guess is that he's going to be really, really good for the Monsters this year. But again, he's a guy that I probably would put him in the lineup over a guy like Miles Wood, right? He's a guy that is going to be effective in the bottom six. In theory, anyway, he should be. If he plays like he did at, and again, prospect tournament is a very small sample size. The prospect camp that he went to immediately after the draft, small sample size, but like whenever he's been on the ice, he's looked good, right? So he, again, is kind of a dark horse to make the roster. I think he's the most bottom six suitable of those three guys. I think Luka Delbalbaluz is a middle six guy. I think Mikhail Pucha is a middle six guy. Delbalbaluz arguably a top six guy, but like he probably tops out as a second liner. But Jack Williams, I feel like his game could fit into a bottom six role in a way that the other two guys don't. So maybe he's the he's the guy to make that quote unquote difficult decision for Everton, which would be fun. I like it when dark horses make the cut. It's fun. That's all I've got for today. We'll be back tomorrow with a new episode. We'll talk about the first day of training camp. We'll talk about any surprises that there are. We'll probably talk a little bit more about the playoff game. The preseason game. That was Freudian. The preseason game on Sunday, because it'll be the last episode before the weekend. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. I've been Jay Foster. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster. Nope. You can find me on Blue Sky at JAKOBFORSTER. You can't find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster anymore. Sorry about that. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets, though. And you can find the show on Blue Sky as well at LO-Blue Jackets. You can also email me if you have comments, questions, criticisms at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. Thank you once again for listening. And until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.